Hi, this is Lane8492. This is the only true crime story video I'm doing today. This one is on another foreign crime, this time not in the United Kingdom, but in Russia. This is on infamous serial killer Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. He was a cannibal, just like the infamous Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Of course, many of you know Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. Of course, Andrei, it's Russian for Andrew. He is probably one of the worst, probably the worst and most infamous serial killer ever known in Russia. He was born in 1936 in the Ukraine. Apparently, there was a rumor that one of his brothers was killed and cannibalized. That would be his brother Stepan Romanovich Chikatilo, but I'm not going to go into the exact details into that. But the area he mostly terrorized was Rostov, which got him dubbed the Rostov Ripper, the Red Ripper, the Butcher of Rostov, and the Forest Strip Killer. His known killing spree started with his first victim of Yelena Zakotnova. She was 9 years old. She was the first known victim of Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. And sadly, another person would wind up taking the blame for that crime. A 25-year-old laborer named Alexander Kravchenko. He was found guilty of the murder and was sentenced to death and was executed for it by a gunshot to the back of the head. But it would later be proven that Alexander Kravchenko was not the one who killed Yelena Zakotnova. Turns out it was Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo who did it, and as a result, Alexander Kravchenko was given a posthumous pardon. But there would be other killings. Also, the Russians were able to do a successful psychological profile, like the killer would be suffering from impotence, which, of course, Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was suffering from. But it was a massive investigation to find this massive monster and bring him to justice. I remember reading that the detective was shocked and appalled at what they were dealing with and that they got to find this monster and stop him. Of course, they did a composite drawing of the perpetrator that was when it came to one victim, Dmitry Potashnikov. It would be massive surveillance that they did at train stations in Rostov, Russia, that would finally lead to the arrest of the real perpetrator, Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. And when he was finally arrested, he confessed to everything that he did, of all the crimes he committed. Of course, this would be, he went on trial in the 90s, not long after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but I'm not going to get into the politics, no. And being that he was put on trial to prevent mob vigilante justice, they had to put him in an iron bar cage in the courts, and also had to remove disruptiveness to maintain order during his trial. But he was tried in Rostov on April 14th, 1992, before Judge Leonid Akhbujanov. Eventually, Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, he was found guilty of all the brutal and atrocious and demonic crimes that he had committed. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was eventually taken to the Russian prison to await his year on death row. After all of his appeals were exhausted within a year, that's real quick, because here in the United States, the appeals process runs too long, which has allowed death row inmates to live on borrowed time. But it was amazing how in Russia at the time, when they were carrying out death sentences, that the appeals process doesn't last very long. And certainly Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo would be no exception. And finally, on the day of his execution at the Russian prison, after President Boris Yeltsin denied clemency and the Russian Supreme Court denied him declined to intervene. He was at the Novo-Cherkassk prison. And on the day of his execution, when it was his time, he was taken from his holding cell inside the Russian prison and brought to some soundproofed room. And there, the guard took out a Makarov handgun and executed Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo by a gunshot to the back of the head. And as a result, his last words were, "Don't make the same mistake I made," were part of his last words in Russian. He has since been buried in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery, since there was no next of kin to claim his body. Well, hope you enjoy this video. Let me know what you think. Thanks.